Hi, everyone. So today I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. And this is when we have blended families, when there is a step parent involved, when there is a new significant other in the lives of your children, and when we also have children who have at least one toxic parent in their lives, and how we can help those children by helping ourselves. So, if this is something that is interesting to you and that you want to use in order to help yourself heal along your emotional abuse recovery so that you can also help your kids, stay tuned because I am having a special guest on. Her name is Maria Natapov, and she is a step parenting coach, and you're not going to want to miss this. Welcome to the Emotional Abuse Recovery Podcast, a podcast specifically designed to help you heal after a toxic or narcissistic relationship. This podcast teaches you to use your subconscious mind to go from feeling stuck to set free. In here, you will learn how to use the power of your own mind to free yourself from emotional pain, move forward with confidence, and experience the inner peace you deserve in your healing journey after emotional abuse. I'm your host and subconscious reprogramming coach, Allison Dagny. So let's get started. Hi, everyone. So today I have a very special guest with me, and Maria, because you know yourself better than anyone, I would love to just hand the floor over to you to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here speaking with you, Allison, today. So yes, my name is Maria Natapov. I am a step parenting coach and a rapid resolution practitioner. And I guess to tell you a little bit about me and kind of what brought me here. So I was an immigrant from Moscow, Russia, coming to America when I was almost 9 years old with my family. We were Jewish refugees because there's a lot of persecution at that time in Russia, particularly for those who were, Jews. And so coming here, it was a huge cultural shock because the culture, the values, the language, absolutely everything was very, very different than my motherland, I guess. And so it offered me an amazing, unique perspective. But of course, at the time, that wasn't something I was able to recognize. It was a tricky and kind of difficult and heavy transition for me. It wasn't easy. I was an only child also. So I think that maybe contributed to it. And just the expectations, like my former culture, it was very much, focused on outcomes and achievements and drive and inspiration. And we didn't really talk about feelings. We had a lot of emotions. We were like very, kind of passionate. It was one way to describe it. Another way is explosive, just really intense interactions, but never discussing what's at the root of that, or why is it this way, or what are we really hoping to achieve? Those were not conversations we had. And here I felt like that was the case, right? And also that there was a focus on kids having autonomy. Whereas again, in my former culture, it was more like kids were a possession and very, tight-knit families, oftentimes living together for multiple generations of folks living together in one space. So just a very, very different outlook and approach. And I, probably not surprising, just with all of the challenges and the cultural and even generational gaps that were happening for me with my primary caregivers, I fell into a relationship that was supportive, but certainly had its own unhealthy kind of aspects. So I later learned that we were codependent and that my ex had sort of narcissistic tendencies, which at the time that we're splitting up, that a counselor brought that to my attention. That was a very new concept. So I don't even think she spoke about it in those terms until much later when I stumbled on somebody with a similar story. And I was like, wait, you had that experience too? Because as you know very well, Allison, when you're speaking to somebody who hasn't experienced it, you're almost hesitant to even talk about it because it just sounds so far reaching, and you sound like, oh my God, no one's going to believe me. They're just going to think I'm totally imagining this or like exaggerating, but it's almost uncomfortable to even begin to really explain what that's like. So it was liberating for me to learn that. I was excited to have, found other people who knew what that was like. And then of course, like I said, the counselor that brought it to my attention, once I realized that, it was like a bus that hit me straight, like over my head. It was like, oh my gosh, I need to figure this out. What is going on here? So I started to untangle and, heal my own wounds and really understand the patterns that had been going on and all of the things. And through that work, and, some opportunities that I was taking to really allow myself to expand and grow and explore, I met my, now fiance, and he had a daughter at the time we met. And so at this point, we've been together for over 10 years. So, halfway through that, so 5 years in, she told us that she was being abused and neglected while living with mom and stepdad, where she was living every week during the week, just for ease of like going to the same school and having her friends, et cetera. And we had her every weekend. And so that was interesting because I recognized that a lot of how she was behaving was how I was feeling at the time when I was young, even though it was very different circumstances, but it was so interesting because it gave me insight. And I remember, behaving a particular way on the outside. And I remember what I was really feeling on the inside. Like I just wanted that embrace. I just wanted the sweetness. I just wanted the hug. But on the outside, it was bristling and very kind of protective. And, it seemed like sending all the signs of keep away from me. And so just different things like that I realized I was in this unique position to really understand her and help her. And I think it also gave me insight that because of these experiences, I was probably able to understand a lot of the dynamics of challenges that kids were having with their caregivers, as well as like boundaries and how to stay within your lane, so to speak, and all of these things. So it led me through that to a certified parent coaching certification that was trauma informed, which was eye-opening and truthfully like very healing for me personally, in addition to extremely educational. And then I wanted some more core coaching competencies. So I did a program that was ICF accredited for that specifically. And then I stumbled on rapid resolution therapy, which was just a dream come true. It was a quick and effective way to not re-traumatize oneself and not get into too many details, getting bogged down, but just allowing the mind to reprocess and in a very easy and comfortable way through analogies and sort of storytelling, the way that it was basically taught to survive, right? Like a lot of the thoughts that we have that maybe don't feel so good, or we don't want to be having, or emotions that come up that also we recognize, okay, this isn't serving me, but it just keeps happening and keep getting in this mood. Or even sometimes actions, right? Like some examples would be substance abuse, but some more benign examples that we might not take as seriously is like, oh, I just want to binge Netflix. Oh, I'm just not going to do the thing, like do the work thing or whatever it is, or maybe even like go out and see friends. I'm just going to kind of hunker down and be by myself. And these are patterns that are created usually because it's some sort of a response to a traumatic event. And sometimes it might be something that we all recognize as an extremely strong traumatic event. And sometimes it might be something that typically we don't think of as having that intense of a response, but it nonetheless does. And the quote unquote trauma of the thing is very unique and personal. So it's not something that one could blanketly say, this is trauma, this is not, because it all depends on where the person is at and what is overwhelming to their senses, which will obviously be very different in each situation. And so that's what this modality recognizes and kind of helps one to overcome, is the hard wiring that occurs based on a way that one maybe needed to respond or was the only way to respond at the time to survive that incident, but isn't necessarily the optimal way to respond in other situations that come up to give them the results that they want. And so, so I just feel so blessed to have been led here. And I guess that's, what I help folks with.
Can you give me a little bit more details about, so you actually coach the step parents, is that right?
That is right. Yes.
Does the primary parent ever come into play sometimes, or is it just mainly the step parent?
Primarily, it's the step parents. I have definitely worked with the primary caregivers as well. And actually, prior to becoming focused solely on step parenting, I was a parent coach with a specialty in healing trauma, because kids who have trauma, um, or maybe other needs, like sometimes even neurodiverse things and things like that, they have very unique needs, and they don't respond well to the typical way we tend to approach, parenting and or discipline. So it really requires a slightly deeper understanding of those um, those responses and what's really underneath that, and what's going on at the core, to build that trust and build the community, and therefore have not only a stronger connection, which is always the way to improve things, and improve the child's confidence and just really help them flourish in life, but also, again, it's modeling and it's creating a safe container for that child to develop those skills, because certainly in traumatic situations that gets hindered, right? Because they're in survival mode, just like probably many of us can relate to as well.
Yeah, well, I love that because, something that as a parent myself of children who have a toxic parent, I'm always looking for ways to help my child. But I think a piece of this that a lot of people forget about is the step parent, and the step parent plays a vital role a lot of times. And sometimes the step parent may come in and be a source of strength and a source of support, where, like in my case, my boyfriend is like that. Like, he is not my husband, he's not the step parent, but he plays that role. And I think a lot of times, the parents are the ones that shoulder most of this, like they need to take care of it. But really, the step parent plays a huge role, especially if they're in the lives of these kids day in and day out, or, like in your case, you were there with her, all the time. I mean, not every day, but certainly a significant portion of her life. And we have to play this team role, right? We're a team with the parent of the child, and they need as much support as possible. Certainly not in all cases. There is a step parent, or there is a partner or something of the primary parent. But if there is, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what it is that you feel like that the step parent's role really can be, that a lot of times is neglected or isn't even considered.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a great question. And of course, it's hard to have one answer for all of the things, but I can speak to some of the core principles. So, for example, in my case, so yes, I was the step parent, but then when we learned of the abuse, we actually went to court, and my fiance, petitioned for full physical custody, because naturally, like my stepdaughter, she didn't want to be in that house. She was terrified. She wasn't getting her needs met. So, not by choice, but I became essentially like full-time mom role. And it was challenging because I also had to navigate holding space for the fact that I'm not her mom. And in my case, she calls me mom, and she said things like, "Oh, I really don't want to have anything to do with mom." Like, currently she chose to have no contact. They try to do family therapy. We try to encourage it, but of course, there's only so much encouragement we can do. And I just keep having conversations with her that, hey, your decision right now doesn't have to stay forever. You might change your mind. It's okay to have both feelings of like extreme anger and like you don't want to, but also missing her and loving her. And, because it's really complicated, and there's not one roadmap for all of this. There's no way to say like this is right and this is wrong, right? And so yeah, it's really difficult. And again, so as far as the role a step parent can play, it really depends on the dynamic and what's going on, right? Because I've heard all kinds of stories where maybe the bio parent, is in and out of prison sometimes, or is struggling with drug addiction. Or maybe, there's just extreme toxicity and it's 50-50 custody, but there's just a lot of like tension and sort of like gaslighting and all kinds of things, right? Because divorce is painful and difficult, and we're all humans, and, it's not easy, and it's an adjustment, et cetera, et cetera. So it really just depends. But yes, I tend to think of step parents as, I know societally we have very hard lines from a legal perspective of it's only once you're married. But the reality is, like in our case, we aren't married, not by choice. We aren't married because the budget we had set aside for our wedding went to the legal fees to help get her out of that situation. I would never change that for a single day. I was like thrilled to be in a position that we had something to be able to put towards those funds. That was the top priority. And, since then we've just been, again, building up that nest egg. So now we're finally planning our wedding in a couple of years, but it's taken a while. And so I think just in general too, it seems there's a shift in our culture where people aren't necessarily running to get married. It's something that happens, but it doesn't happen as quickly as it once did. And so I think the reality, just like you said, there's often times that the step parent is spending a lot of time with the children, and they are heavily involved in their care and meeting their needs and, doing all the things. Maybe it's drop off and pick up. Maybe it's providing food for them. Maybe it's even helping them with homework. And, and a lot of them might also go above and beyond and really, take significant care to ensure that they're providing like good educational opportunities and taking them to different things and planning different events and all the stuff that, really comes with being a caregiver. And so I think what's really important, and I know again that it's difficult and it can be really maybe scary and intimidating, especially post-divorce when there's so much of oneself that gets lost. I've also been through a divorce with my ex-husband. So I know how unsettling it is to lose such a big part of yourself and be mourning, the life that you thought you were going to have that didn't quite come to fruition. It's certainly a process, but I would advise the parents to consider, no one is really trying to replace you. And even if it may feel that way, perhaps just a conversation would be a better way to handle that, because they probably just don't know of another way to do it. They're not trying to overstep. But really thinking of it as it's another person who just wants to give your child love. They just want to be there. They just want to help. And that's a beautiful thing, right? For that child, just like the more people that can love them and take an interest in them and be there as a listening ear, or perhaps, they have a different skill, like perhaps their hobby is something that nobody in the family has. So now they have an opportunity to go and explore that with this other person in their life. Like that only enriches their life. And it's also an opportunity to shoulder some of the burden. Like everyone is strapped for time these days between work and responsibilities and things they want to achieve. And, and we recognize also self-care is really important, which has kind of never really been on anyone's radar until I think recently. So it's just a lot. And, when you can work together and recognize like this is an opportunity to help as opposed to kind of a threat coming in trying to replace anybody or threaten the relationship or undermine, right? Like, and just having grace that, hey, everyone is doing the best they can. They're probably not trying to disrupt things and hurt anybody. And, and I'm not excusing though, because there certainly we've all, had those people who sometimes are malevolent, whether they recognize it or not. And certainly those are really important things to see and be aware of and be cautious of and take the necessary actions to ensure that your child is safe and that you are keeping those boundaries also for yourself and your family. But really just seeing that this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for additional like love and support for not only your children, but also yourself as well. And that can work really beautifully when we explore things from that perspective. And I also think there's something so powerful that comes with intention. Yeah. So I think there's something really powerful that comes with setting an intention. So when someone is able to orient themselves towards a very specific way of looking at things, there's something powerful that allows all the other junk to get out of the way. So for example, just like when we use the GPS and we have our starting point and then we have our destination, and now the GPS can give us, at least one route, but even sometimes alternative routes to get there with the assurance that we will get there. And I think it works like that as well. So when you're able to just look at things from your highest self of like, okay, where do I want to be with this, right? How do I want to be looking at the situation? So when you're able to look at things with, okay, this person has the best interests, then it just helps to allow everything else to melt away. And, or if there are certain sticking points or kind of obstacles to maneuver, you have a clear perspective of how to do that. And you're more likely to find a solution and a workaround or an alternative route, versus if you're caught in this whirl of, well, do they have good intentions or do they not? And then it just adds an extra burden for you because you don't have that clarity. So it doesn't give you a way to move forward because you're constantly like you're in indecision all the time and you're constantly thinking. And now you're also, instead of being driven by your internal kind of values of where you want things to be, you're driven by external things because you're like, well, this shows me this, and this other example shows me this other thing. And they're constantly contradicting themselves. And so you're always at the mercy of something external as opposed to driving everything where you want it to go.
That
I hope
makes
that
sense.
was,
Yeah, no,
that was the
I was
clear.
just thinking because my kids have a step parent now because my
Mhm.
ex recently got married, and I don't particularly care for this person. I don't think she's a bad person. She's just, done some things and said some things about me that are not true. And so I don't have a relationship with her per se, but my kids do, right? My kids and two of my kids like her
Mhm.
and care about her. And I know that she definitely has their best interest in mind, regardless of the relationship that I have with her.
Mhm.
Now, I wonder, this is a question I was thinking of while you were talking. Does this, setting this intention and thinking of things in a way like, they actually have the best interest of my kids in mind, right? Considering that what you said, like obviously there are exceptions to that rule, and maybe there are people who don't have that best interest in mind. However, should we be looking at this from all angles, meaning the parent looking at the step parent that way, the step parent looking at the primary parent that way, like from all angles, because our listeners here could be step parents themselves or could be primary parents. So do you feel
Absolutely.
like this?
Yeah, and absolutely, right? Like ideally that would be the best way to approach it, and it allows to bridge any sort of gaps, right? Because then we're able to see like, oh, and have compassion for what it is that might be getting in the way, right? Like um, there's obviously things that we can't control. And a lot of times, the person is with either the ex-spouse or the new person. And the point is they're getting information not directly from the source. They might not either feel comfortable or be offered the opportunity to be like, okay, I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to talk to them. And then I understand that the truth is somewhere in the middle. So they don't often have that benefit. So, and I think too, sometimes like the parent, I think is more in the driving seat. Any primary parent, they're more in the driving seat of the situation. So where it feels right, or if you're so inclined, like go ahead and have a heart to heart and just say, hey, here's some things that are my values around my kids. And, here's how I feel about things. Like, let's have a chat. What about you? Where do you stand? It just allows an opportunity to even see what is similar, what is not, and then possibly how can you maybe meet in the middle on the things that you guys disagree about or where you have differences. And at least, sometimes it could be a agree to disagree situation, but you realize there's, like you said, no harm per se, with anything having to do with how they're going to care for your kids or be or show up for your kids.
Yeah. And, I think about the different dynamics, and you can relate to my partner in my life because he's, not my children's biological parent, but he's there for them a lot in a lot of ways as a father figure. And I think about like, a lot of times it always boils down to me, my decisions, what I want, and he usually defers to me. But there are so many, it's a weird dynamic because there's so many times I'm like, what do you think? Or what's your opinion? And, I want to lean on him for advice or perspective because very often, the step parent does have a different perspective than the parent. A lot of times they can see things in very different ways. Has that
Yeah.
been your experience too, where you can kind of like, enlighten your fiance,
Yeah.
say, hey, have you thought about this
Yes.
or that?
100%. And I think you're so right. That can often be a point of strength, right? That offering that other perspective. At the same time, it can definitely be a point of contention because certainly, like you said, the primary caregivers, the parents that have been with these children since birth, they have a very different perspective. They have a very unique perspective and they have different kind of bond. And, that can make them see things in a different light. So yes, where possible, it's great to be able to hear objectively. but it's tricky. And there's almost a skill set that comes along with it of being able to navigate that and navigate your own emotions without having that cloud your judgment. Or because as you can imagine, right, certainly defenses could rise. All kinds of emotions can suddenly come barreling forward that would get in the way of having those conversations, and being able to take all the valuable nuggets. And instead it could actually sort of start to possibly cause rifts, et cetera. So just walking slowly, breathing, noticing, what do I need? Do I need a break? Is this too much? Okay, to be continued, or what have you. Or maybe we just stick to certain aspects of the conversation. And I already know that like some other things are going to be challenging for me at this time. So it's not, we can't really discuss it. But yeah, where possible, yeah, having exactly like you said, having an objective third party opinion or perspective, or a perspective, because it's possible also that given that you've seen your kids when they were really young, you might have sort of an opinion and a perspective that is a little bit, at an earlier point in the kids' lives, or just the way that you want to see them, but not necessarily maybe seeing exactly what's going on. And it could be an opportunity possibly to address a need that has arisen that is just not, it's just not necessarily at the forefront for the primary caregiver, whereas the step parent might be able to notice and point it out. And it's not a criticism or judgment. It's actually done in a, usually, I mean, ideally in a responsive way of, hey, this is something I'm seeing, and it'd be great to start thinking of how do we address that? How do we help them with this? Because yeah, kids are extremely, they're like sponges, and very much so up until the age of 7. But even as tweens and teens, we have this tendency, because kids they're taller now and they're more mature and they're more independent, and societally we kind of accept it like, oh yeah, they're holed up in their room, only their friends matter. But they actually do need our input and guidance. They're still very much in a place where they don't have all the answers, and they can really benefit of also having a trusted person that they can rely on to have the conversations with them, especially the difficult ones. There's so much they're navigating romantically, physically, emotionally, and there's so much also that's happening in their world that we didn't have to deal with at their age because of exposure, because of where things are at. I mean, the pandemic, all kinds of stuff, just complicated things. And they can really use someone who can just help them process, or give them, some advice, or just be a shoulder to lean on in those difficult moments, so that they don't feel that they have to do it all alone.
Yeah.
And because they can, like any of us, they can often put on this tougher exterior than what's really happening. And meanwhile, they're just like scared and confused and, aren't sure what to do. So yeah, I'm a big fan of open communication on all different things, even like sexuality, all sorts of things.
Yeah. And I love what you said that too. It's important for us to distinguish the, like mom and dad
Mhm.
from the way they interpret their child, or have a filter of their child, or perceive their child, right? Because they've raised them from
Yeah.
infancy,
Yeah.
or, pretty much their whole life. And, in my particular situation, I've noticed that it's a little bit harder for me to see my kids as I actually shouldn't say that. It's harder for me to put myself in their position because I'm their mom, right? So it's
Right.
harder for me. So when my boyfriend is here, he is able to do that a lot easier. Like, remember when you were 14? Remember when he says that all the time. I'm like, no, like I don't think about that very often, but it's nice to have that, like you said, that third party perspective, not that he's always trying to be on their team or take sides, but show me a different way
Yeah.
that could help me parent them in a way that is perceived better for them, that is better for them overall. And so I think it's really important that that self-awareness to see,
Yes.
how we act as parents, and when we do things, are we doing it just because it's the habit and it's always been this way and we've always done it like that?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you have a step parent come in and they say, why do you do it like that? Or what about this? Or have you ever thought about that? And they're very intimate in this little family life of yours now. So all of a sudden you're like, And like you said, the defenses could go up. I've always done it like this, or this is just how it is, but being self-aware, right, can actually
Mhm.
help us parent our kids way better.
Yes. Yes,
Because we can see
absolutely.
our flaws and we can see if there's areas that we need to improve.
Yeah. And, being transparent with your kids about all that too is so powerful because, oftentimes I know this was a conversation I had with my mom a lot of times was she admitted to me she was a single parent. And granted, I was also raised by my grandparents quite heavily, but um the conversation of, I would come to you and I would cry and I would ask you if you've ever experienced it. And you always said like, no. And you're always so stoic. And she said, yeah, I felt like I had to be like the superhero. I felt like I had to lead that, show you that example. And so again, this was a big cultural difference, but I think sometimes there is that residue of, oh, we have to appear a particular way. And we worry that if we're human with our kids, that's going to show a weakness and then they're just not going to listen to us. If we admit that we've made mistakes and we've had flaws, and actually it's quite the opposite. And moreover, kids are often tuned into our BS
Yeah.
a lot more than we think they are. Like we think, oh yeah, no, they're none the wiser that this is going on. No, they totally know. They might not know exactly what's going on, but they can feel that something's off. They can feel, if you're kind of keeping something from them, whatever it is. So certainly it's important to maintain boundaries and not overburden the kids with adult things, but to the degree possible, being able to be open with them in simple terms with, like I said, without oversharing, just so that, you're acknowledging what's going on and being able to say, hey, this is a difficult time, for example, with divorce or post divorce. Those things can be really challenging. So just saying, hey, this is difficult. Like, are you feeling that too? Is this a difficult transition? I can, it's hard for me sometimes too. And here's the things that I'm navigating, or here's how it feels sometimes. Does it ever feel like that for you? Because even if they're going to be quiet and sort of withdrawn or seemingly withdrawn, they're paying attention. And with time, it does give them permission, and it makes it okay for them to be like, oh, yeah, this doesn't feel so great. This is a difficult time. This is a difficult moment, but it's okay.
Mhm.
And somebody else gets it. And it's okay that I'm feeling like this. This is normal because mom or dad just said that this is how they're feeling too. And they're adults, So just really like demystifying and normalizing and validating what they might be feeling. And sometimes too, kids might not have the words. So if you can say, hey, do you mind if I guess? Like, will you tell me if I guess right? Like, is this going on for you? Because also a big thing that affects kids in these situations is they have loyalty binds to their primary caregivers. And that can get in the way. Like even sometimes, so first of all, for adults, right? Like they're adults, they're like, okay, I'm ready. Like this relationship didn't work out. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to live my best life. But kids take longer because to them, it's like, but this is all I've ever known. And this is mom and dad. And even if one of them is terrible or has been abusive or what have you, like that's also still a part of who they are. Genetically, they are half of that person, or half of them is that person. So no matter what, they're going to have strong connections and want that person to care about them and be in their lives and to be able to think and feel positively about them. So sometimes they might even feel bad about liking the new, step parent because they feel that that way they're like breaking the loyalty bond to their primary caregiver. And so just being able to name some of that and being able to name like, hey, it's okay. And I understand that this might take you some time to get used to, and we're all navigating it. And just let me know what you're comfortable with and what you're not, and really at all, wherever possible, never speaking ill of especially their primary caregivers, their mom and dad. But even I would say the step parents too, like where possible, not bad mouthing anybody who has a caregiver role in their lives. That they might, because sometimes they might even feel like, oh, I need to badmouth this person because I want mom to like me, or I don't want her to feel bad, or what have you. Like they just take on too much of the responsibility naturally because they're caring and empathetic and they love their parents. And so it might come off one way, but even when they are doing it, just really abstaining from speaking ill and rather just speaking objectively. And if anything, maybe it's just an opportunity to share your own values and morals and just saying, hey, this is how I feel. This is what I've come to learn. And here's some, maybe you have some concrete examples, like stories of why or what led you there. Like that's always great for them to hear, because that's a lot of times how they're able to process information at that age, is in a concrete way. So the more examples you have, it helps them to see things like in a cause and effect way, and maybe apply some of that to their own lives or what they're seeing around them. And over time, it will stick. I know sometimes I had that experience a million times. It's like we're having the same conversation every day, multiple times a day when we stop having this conversation. But it does gain traction with them, and they do start to integrate that learning at their own rate. And over time, you don't need to quite have as many conversations about the same thing.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about was how you had said that when you're talking bad about the other parent, like if you were to talk bad about the other parent, then that sort of plants a seed in that child's mind, right? So then they know, I don't like this other parent, or I don't like the step parent, or the step parent doesn't like my mom, or whatever, however that's happening. Then the child ends up feeling like they're torn, right, between two families, and they have to watch what they say, and they have to, maybe fake something just to appease the other parent, or, they're not able to be their true authentic selves when that's happening. And I'm a child of divorce. My parents divorced when I was 12 or 13 years old, and they had a very nice divorce. It was not like tumultuous or bad, and they got along and everything was fine. And then my dad got remarried. And I knew this woman. I'd known her for a long time because she had worked with my dad for years. And I remember a few times that my mom would say some things, not necessarily like to badmouth her, but like to question her, or, say things that just maybe made me put my radar up and go, okay, I know she's uncomfortable with this, or she's not happy with this, right? So I then would always have to be more careful about the things that I shared. And what happened was I wasn't actually comfortable sharing things with my mom as much. And, I think about that from a parental standpoint. If I do that about my ex's new wife or him, then my kids might be less likely to share important information with me or create a bond of closeness, right? If I'm judging the other person, or if I'm making comments about them, then my kids aren't going to feel safe coming to me, because it puts them in a really awkward position. And I want to create that bond with my kids, and I want to keep it close so that they feel comfortable. And I have a funny story I wanted to tell you that I just thought of. My daughter, who went through her first communion, she came to me one day and she said, "Mom, I really want you to be my sponsor for or not first communion, confirmation, 8th grade confirmation." And she said, "I want you to be my sponsor." I was like, "Oh, great. I would love to be." I was really happy and excited about it. And then the next day she came back and said, "Actually, your parents are not allowed to be that, so I have to pick someone else." I said, "Okay." I didn't know who she was going to pick. And she picked her dad's fiance at the time. And, initially I could have just been like, "Why would you pick her?" Or "I can't believe it." Or "That's, that you shouldn't pick." I didn't have those beliefs and thoughts, because I've done the similar type of work that you've done as far as healing goes. So it didn't impact me in that way. But imagine the detriment that could have happened if I had done that. And if I had said those things, I said, "Great, I'm glad, she'll be a really great sponsor for you." Like, period. Like, that was it. So then my daughter feels safer to come to me, and she's free to choose and not feel guilty about her choices. Like, she wanted to choose her because she's in her life and she cares about her. And that's a perfectly acceptable reason to choose someone for that. So as that parent, I didn't want to, sow those seeds of potential guilt or doubt or whatever in her.
You're basically you'd be stifling her voice, right? Is what you're saying. And you were saying that you don't want to do that, because ultimately, I think, right, when we think of, well, we want to have a close bond with our kids. Well, why? Because we want to be able to be there for them during the bad times and the good, because, and we want them to know that they can trust our opinion, not that they have to like watch their back, or like, "Oh, I can share this with her, but I have to like not really pay attention to what she's saying because I can't really trust her judgment because she's going to try to manipulate me or sway me." But also, when we think of Well, when our kids leave and become independent, which we all hopefully hope for them, because that's right. Like we want them to be able to and become confident and comfortable creating their own life. We want to know that they're coming back because they want to spend time with us, not because they feel forced to, or there's some sort of obligation, or they feel bad, or they're like, okay, check box. No, we want to know that they really want to spend time with us. They're enjoying themselves and they're excited to see us because they know that, again, like you said, they can be their true, authentic selves and we're a support system for them. And we can also be our true, authentic selves and we can share some wisdom in a real way, not in a way to like that's contrived or that is manipulating them to make a particular decision or anything like that to please somebody else. And what we may not even realize is if they're starting to do that at home, they're going to be so much more likely to do that in their other relationships, because oftentimes these frameworks for these relationships is what they carry with them into the world. And even if they're like, oh, I didn't like that at all, that's not how I want it to be, I've experienced that myself, but it still gets ingrained in there and becomes an automatic response. And to get to the bottom of all that and untangle that whole web and recognize, oh, wow, I didn't realize how I was contributing to creating this situation in my life, that's a whole other complicated, heavy load that, again, if we can avoid it, why not, right? Why not give them that gift of just making things easier and straightforward and allow them to find their happiness and their truth sooner?
Yeah, I love that. I agree 100%. And what I really like to focus on is what we can control inside of ourselves, right? We obviously
Yes.
can't control what happens at the other house. We can't control
Yes.
if the other parent is talking bad about us. We can't control, those types of external factors, but we can control what happens inside of us. So, what is something that a parent or step parent could do to help themselves first before
Yes.
trying to help the children? Because I think a lot of people neglect that. And I
Yes.
think it's really important that, we try to help the kids, but we forget about, what's going on inside of us.
100%. Well, I think it's what you and I already kind of touched on and mentioned that we've done for ourselves. Just really stopping and recognizing, okay, what do I need? Because it's a complicated situation to be in. There's so many stakeholders and everybody wants something. You want to help as best you can, but it's hard. And there's a lot of personal emotions that come up with that because, like we all have in every situation, different responses that are very real. And they're legitimate and they deserve some space to explore, right? Whether just to feel the feelings and process them through and be like, okay, I'm good, I'm done with that. Or whether there's something deeper that it's perhaps a sign for, like to explore, like, oh, where did that, why did this, remark or situation make me feel this intense, I don't know, anger, insecurity, what have you, hurt? What is there more for me to uncover there? What is there some pattern? Is there a clue? Is there something that I don't remember, from my childhood, what have you? And it's not to like dig up this whole, like, let's open a Pandora's box, but it's recognizing that when you have your own stuff getting in the way, you can't fully show up for others, right? Like it just gets in the way. It's that muddy water that then like kind of gets everywhere and gets into the clean water. And I don't know, I really lost track of that analogy. Sorry, but essentially it gets in the way. It's like junk that is, getting in the way of the clear path. And, to the degree possible, just for the same reason we were talking about, like you want kids to feel safe. You want them to feel like they're getting a true, wise, response and respect and consideration. And in order to do that, it requires for you to recognize, okay, what is my stuff in this? And what does my best self feel about this? And what would really serve them to hear about the situation for me? How do I want them to feel about it afterwards? Right? Like, what is the wisdom I want to impart on them here? And I think so, therefore, it's really important to recognize, like, what is your own stuff so that you can deal with that, but elsewhere, not, dealing with that with them is not the time. Now, maybe sharing with them like, hey, I also have some things that I'm working on is a good thing, because we all have some stuff that we're working through that is complicated for us, that makes us feel a particular way, but not letting that cloud your judgment and cloud how you show up for them.
Yeah, I love that. I
Best
think
advice.
that's
So really self-care
Yeah,
is the
I think
key.
that's great. And one thing that I have done, and I just recently started doing this, was because I'm doing that check-in, and asking those
Yeah.
questions. And I think leading with curiosity instead of,
Yes.
beating yourself up with these like judgments and stuff about yourself is really, really important. But one thing that I did that was really scary, but I did it anyway, was I asked my kids, what can I do to be a better mom? Like that was a really hard thing for me to do. Like, what can I do for you that you feel like would make me a better mom? And now I led with, I'm trying to do improvements in my life. I'm trying to fix things in my relationships. I'm trying to be the best version of myself that I can be. So what is it about me that you have seen? And they told me, they all three said the same thing. They were like, you don't listen, you don't listen enough. And I was like, oh, and I realized and recognized, but I wouldn't have necessarily known that had I not asked the question, right? And I
Yeah.
didn't get defensive, and I didn't say, yes, I do. I listen to you all the time. And what about the other day when I was listening to you, right? I could have
Mhm.
done that, but I just took it in and I said, all right,
Yep.
flagged that. I marked it. So now I have something that I can improve on, right? Everything we do is just practicing to be better.
That's it.
So, being aware of those things is great. But if you're not aware of it on your own, then ask the question, right? You can,
Absolutely.
why not?
Absolutely. And again, recognizing, like you said, like they're not trying to hurt you. They're just trying to give you some feedback.
Right.
And what a beautiful thing, because now you've taught them that it's okay to ask for feedback and to be curious and to recognize, yeah, we all have some things we could be working on. So maybe they're like, hey, what could I be doing better and with XYZ?
Right. Well, because we're as
Um,
parents always, I don't say, shouldn't say always, but a lot of times in the parental role, we're saying you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to
right.
be better at this and you need to not have a smart mouth and you need to not be so sarcastic and right. So we're constantly barking, barking,
Mhm.
barking, barking as parents to our kids. What is it about us that we could look at too? And I think that's really
Yes,
important for parents, for step parents, for people,
I
really
agree.
in general.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah. So that's beautiful that you are able to do that with kindness and compassion and grace and model that for your kids. It's amazing.
Thanks. And I love all of the advice. And I mean, having this conversation is really different, right? It's a really different way of us to be able to help heal. And that's what this podcast is all about, is to help
Yeah.
people heal after emotional abuse. And when you've got a divorce or you've got a really toxic parent or a toxic person in the life of your children, you want to do what's best for them.
Yes.
So we can't control what other people do, but we
No.
can control ourselves and we can control
Yes.
what we do and the healing levels that we take and the steps
Yeah.
that we take.
And the beautiful thing is kids, again, so they're aware of a lot. They might not exactly make sense of it and be able to name it and call it for what it is, but they are incorporating that knowledge and they are assessing and reassessing. So if you're a positive example, even if they have somebody who isn't, they'll recognize it because they will notice with time. And it doesn't matter if, like you said, they're trying to appease or whatever, they're doing what they have to do to survive. But that information is getting integrated and they're noticing like, oh yeah, wow, I really feel super comfortable with mom and I can just be myself and I feel like I can talk about anything. She's so accepting. And here I feel like I have to be like a fake version of me. I feel like there's always pressure to do this or that, or I really don't like the response I get when I say something, or when I do this, it just feels like that's too much. And they're starting to pick up on what feels good and what feels like more the right way. I don't want to say right or wrong, but the better way to be. Like they're noticing that as far as how they want to show up in the world and just what generally feels better to them, and therefore what's going to most likely have the same impact on others that they interact with, be they other like friends and just important relationships in their lives, or eventually their own kids.
Yeah, I think that's really important to recognize that they are paying attention.
Yes.
Sometimes
So
they
you
don't.
don't have to worry so hard that if you don't say it, they're not going to know. They're going to know. It'll take them time, but they'll get there.
Yeah, a lot of times we think we have to teach by lecturing or teach by
Yeah.
teaching or teach by telling and punishing, but a lot of times they just learn from seeing you. And
Yes.
that's a really powerful way to learn.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation and I hope our audience does as well. What is something I like to ask all my guests? What is something that most people don't know about you that you could share with us?
Huh. Um, well, so I guess it's interesting. Dance was my first language that I felt that I could be really free in. Mhm. And it just so happened that I was really flexible as a kid. And I was very fortunate because living in Moscow, I got access to a lot of culture. So my family, my grandparents in particular, they love the ballet, they love the opera, they love like all kinds of art. So I got to see a lot of theater and ballet as a little kid. And so I developed that appreciation. So I wanted to emulate, and we had like 3 channels in Russia. So I would just put on the like whatever was on, which was usually some sort of a dance, recital, but by professional, choreographed performers. And I would just emulate it. And I remember just being so riveted by feeling so free, because I felt like it was interesting, like language in my family was a big deal. So the vocabulary, like everybody was well read, and my vocabulary was really pretty strong for, a little kid. But I never felt that I could really express myself completely. But in dance, I felt that I could. And I think that quest then translated when I came to America, because I was like, well, I don't know the language and I need to be able to learn the vocabulary. But most importantly, I need to be able to learn how to express myself. So I'm huge on communication, and now have not learned, but maybe tuned into the various types of communications that we have, because it's not just language, it's also body language and even energy to a large degree, and really allowing all of that to inform, okay, what's the temperature here? What would be the best way for me to respond? Maybe I don't respond right now, even if I want to, I just walk away and kind of let things die down and find that opportunity. So yeah.
I love that. That's amazing that you have that bridge, from a child to now, and that connection of the communication, the language, and expressing yourself, which I think you
Yes.
do a beautiful job of. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for being here. Can you please tell our listeners where they can find you, how they can reach you if they want to connect?
Sure. Thank you so much. So yeah, probably. So my website is synergisticstep-parenting.com. So you can find me there, and a way to email me there. And also I'm on LinkedIn, which is, I love LinkedIn. So that's a great way. Just DM me if you want, or, interact with my posts. And Facebook I am on as well. So that's another place that I am. But and also those who might want to hear a little bit more suggestions, I have actionable tips that I provide on my podcast called the Synergistic Step-parenting Podcast. So every week I try to create value by sharing something that blended families and step parents can walk away with and utilize in their everyday to create more harmony and joy.
Great. Thank you so much. And I will include all of that information in the show notes. So if you'd like to reach out to Maria, please do so. She has a lot of resources and a lot of tips that can help us heal and move forward after emotional abuse, or maybe if you're even currently in it or just need extra support. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for being here with me today in the Emotional Abuse Recovery Podcast. I hope you found value here with me. If this podcast episode was helpful to you, I'd love for you to hit subscribe and leave me a review. My goal is to help you go from feeling stuck to set free. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and you can check out whentearsleavescars.com for more resources and information to help you with your own emotional abuse recovery. Until next time, here's to believing in